Hi there. Welcome to Inside the Wooniverse, a podcast brought to you from the corner of Fringe in Maine. I am your host, Colette Baron-Reid. Joining us today is the amazing international best-selling and award-winning author and journalist Lynne McTaggart. She's been called a metaphysical rock star and the Madonna of the quantum world, and is the author of 7 books, including The Bond, The Field, The Power of 8, and The Intention Experiment. And actually, to be honest with you, every single one of her books are books that I have bought and then bought them again in hardcover after I bought them in softcover. So we know these books are important today, and everyone should be reading Lynne McTaggart. Anyway, Lynne is also the co-founder and editorial director of the health magazine What Doctors Don't Tell You and the Get Well International Holistic Health Expo. Best known for the quality of her narrative nonfiction. I mean, it's like her books are like reading detective novels. They're so good. And the depth of her research. Lynne has been consistently voted one of the world's top 100 spiritual leaders for her groundbreaking work with consciousness and the power of thoughts. Welcome to the Wooniverse, Lynne.
Thank you, Colette. It's great to be here with you.
Very, very fantastic. I've been dying to interview you. I mean, I interviewed you a long time ago when I was on Hay House Radio. So this is such an exciting day for me.
Great.
Anyway, in the Wooniverse, we love a good origin story. So let's go back to your childhood. Were you always interested in the unseen connections between us all, between nature? Tell me what it was like. When did you really get that
Yeah,
feeling?
I mean, when I was a teenager, I had a very happy childhood. I grew up in northern New Jersey, Ridgewood, New Jersey. I am the child of 2 sort of children of immigrants, essentially, making good. And I had an older brother, and I had a wonderful childhood, but was always curious, I think, about esoteric things. So as a
Right.
teenager, I was interested in astrology, witchcraft. I was an early meditator. I did meditation when the Maharishi first came to schools and high schools and universities. I was in there really early. I was always interested in stuff like this. I wasn't necessarily all that interested in science, but I was interested in the big questions. Let's put it that
Sure.
way.
That's beautiful. When did you become interested in alternative medical approaches? So you went through your teens, fascinated with things. You and I would have hung out, and then all of a sudden you enter into the like more of this type of conversation. How did you get there?
I got there through being ill. In my 20s, I was a hard-nosed investigative reporter.
Right.
My first book was called The Baby Brokers, and it was the result of breaking a bunch of international baby selling rings. And I posed undercover as an unwed mother. I was one of those people with hidden tape recorders and then as a prospective adoptive parent, and got into what has been called gray market adoption and all kinds of amazing things like babies, pregnant women being imported from Germany, a guy who was setting up an unwed, a hotel for unwed mothers in the Caribbean, that kind of stuff. So things that were being laundered through Mexico. So that was my type of work in my 20s. And I came over to the UK to do a book, a research, a biography. And as I came, I just fell in love with the UK and I stayed here. After the biography was published, I got ill and no one knew what was wrong with me. And I went from the conventional type of doctor to the very outer fringe of alternative medicine. And, I learned a lot of things about my mother, but I didn't get better. So I finally realized I was going to have to take charge of this myself. I was going to have to figure out what was wrong with me, and I was going to have to find the right person to help heal me. So I researched what I thought I had, which was essentially just a faulty microbiome. It's ho-hum now. It was a big deal back then.
Sure.
And I also researched a real pioneer in nutritional medicine, a doctor over here in the UK who was really doing amazing stuff before his time. And I went to him, and together I worked with him for about a year. And as a partnership, essentially, and together we got me better.
And what was his name?
His name was Dr. Stephen Davis.
Stephen Davis. Okay.
He is British. He now lives in Australia, but he set up a whole lab that was taking testings for all sorts of things like low magnesium or candida overgrowth and stuff like that was unheard of back then. Now everybody does it in integrative medicine, but back then it was revolutionary. So the whole experience was so heady for me that I started telling everybody about it, and I started getting boring on the subject. And the man I was with, who eventually became my husband and has been my husband for 32 years, Brian Hubbard, said, "Stop telling me, start telling the world." So we set up what was then a newsletter called What Doctors Don't Tell You. And it was about not only conventional treatments that don't have any evidence of working or have evidence of harm, and it was very evidence-based, but we also wanted to write about evidence of alternative medicine, like what had happened with me. And so we started doing this, and it's been going for 32 years. Now it's been a magazine since 2012. It's in 15 languages, and we keep going. There's still a story to tell. There was a huge story to tell during COVID. So in the course of doing that, I kept coming across these very good studies of spiritual healing. And because I was always interested in that kind of area in the back of my head, I was really curious about this. I kept thinking to myself, if you can send a thought to someone else and make them better, that in itself undermines everything we think about how the world works. So I set about trying to find out why. And I thought I was going to be able to talk to a couple of pioneering physicists or biologists. They'd tell me that there was something like human energy fields. I'd write it up, send in the book, and that was it. I mean, I had, at that point, really convinced my publisher. It was a confidence trick, more or less, because I convinced them to let me go on a journey without a compass. I had no idea what I was looking for. And that book ultimately became The Field. And what I discovered, to my astonishment, was each scientist I talked to had discovered a little piece of what compounded into a completely new view of the world, a completely new science.
Right. I mean, that is a classic. And I believe today they are using that book, The Field, to teach in universities. Is that correct?
They are. Yeah.
Yes.
Who knew?
That's it. Yeah. I mean, I remember reading that book years ago because as an intuitive and a practicing animist, I see the world as connected, and I have evidence. It may be anecdotal, but it's consistent. It's very consistent that there are these extraordinary connections and that time is not linear and all of these things by just being me. And so when your book came out, it was like, oh my God, there is this very intelligent person who has proven, and with all this scientific research that all these things that I've just known are true. It was life-changing. Reading that book when it first came out, it's amazing. And it is still a global bestseller today. So I wonder if you could share a couple of your favorite scientific or medical evidence that supports the widespread belief that the mind and body and spirit or consciousness are more connected than we think.
Oh, gosh. I mean, there were so many things that I loved so much about the research that I did with The Field. I mean, first of all, I think what was really fascinating was the work of Dr. Fritz Albert Popp. Now, all of my hero scientists in The Field, most of them are gone now. But there was the work of the German physicist, Dr. Fritz Albert Popp, who discovered a tiny current of light coming out of the body. He was looking for something. He was thinking that he had found a cure for cancer, but he stumbled across the idea and evidence that all living things send out a tiny current of light, and that this light is synchronicitous. So we're sending, but we're also getting back from other living things a response, essentially. So if you and I were sitting across from each other in the room, we'd be having a conversation, but we'd also be having a conversation of light. So I was amazed by that. I was amazed by the work of Dr. Carl Pribram, who discovered through a horrible experiment that thoughts and memories are not housed in the brain, that the brain is actually a transducer of information, almost like a television set and a television station all at the same moment. He discovered with this rat experiment where they systematically taught a batch of rats a maze. And then they set about, he and a colleague of his set about destroying these poor rats' brains. And the more they destroyed, the more the rats had motor skill issues. But even with most of their brain gone, they still remembered that maze. And so Dr. Pribram came to the conclusion that memory is not inside the brain. It's not inside your head. It's out there in the field. So some of these were pretty amazing. Also, of course, the work of Princeton University, the late Robert John, the Dean of Engineering at Princeton, and his partner, the late Brenda Dunn, who just recently passed, who worked for 25 years on a program in what they called PAIR, Princeton Engineering Anomalous Research Lab. And they tested the power of thoughts to affect electronic equipment. And they did hundreds and thousands of these studies and showed an effect that we can affect these machines. And the effect size, that means the rate of change, is 10 times larger than aspirin, one of the most successful drugs on the planet. So all of these things suggest to us that life is very different from the scientific model, the scientific story that we're told.
Let's talk about the intention experiment. I believe you worked with Dr. Gary Schwartz on that, or he was one of the people that you worked with, and he's pretty extraordinary. In the book, you highlight cutting-edge research conducted at prestigious universities and labs at schools like MIT, Stanford, Princeton, and one of the most fascinating revelations was that thought generates its own palpable energy. Can you expand on this at all? Is that what we were talking about light, or are there other ways of describing this?
Yeah, we demonstrate that, and scientific evidence demonstrates that thought produces a lot of kinds of energy. Dr. Schwartz, who you said, is one of the many scientists I've worked on with the intention experiment. One of his early studies had to do with testing healers. And he found that when they do their healing, when they're running energy, as he puts it, they have a big increase in magnetic energy. They have a big increase in electrical energy, and there's a big increase of light. Dr. Schwartz got hold of a piece of equipment. It's a very sensitive, essentially a telescope that can register faint light in outer space by counting the light photon by photon, light particle by light particle. So he got the idea of seeing if he could measure biophotons through this equipment. So it was kind of light tight. There was a box you had to put things in. So he had healers put their hands inside this box and be there still and then be sending energy. And he found a huge increase in light energy when the healers were sending healing out. So when they were doing an intention for healing, and he could count, because the machine could count it photon by photon, he was able to demonstrate big increase, a big surge of photons when they were sending healing energy.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I actually did I was a part of one of your intention experiments. We did something with a leaf. It's years ago. Do you remember that one with the leaves that were in his right? that was amazing to see how you could actually see, when everybody was sending their intention to the one leaf and how it differed from the other one. I still, right now talking, I have goosebumps even in my hair because people are not taught this. So that's what we consider magic. That's what we think is, that's why we call this the wooniverse, right? It's a playful way to say this woo is true. The woo is true. And what you did again, in that experiment with all of us there sending this intention was fascinating because there's proof. I mean, you can't, it's undeniable evidence. And when you have undeniable evidence, you really shouldn't be denying it, although people still do. Materialist science says it's all BS or whatever. But I do think that there's this really important need for us to understand this. So can we actually talk about what intention is? If we could break it down, we tend to use that word a lot. Can you explain what is that?
Sure. Well, let's go back to the idea that we are sending out energy with our thoughts.
Sure. Yeah.
We've got 70,000 of those thoughts every day. People think of intention as a power thought. I meditate in the morning, I have my power thought, I send it out, and that's the only thing the universe hears. But as we've demonstrated, and as a great deal of science has demonstrated, thoughts generate energy of every sort. I mean, we are energetic beings. We're not filled with just chemicals and electrical signaling, and we're not filled with subatomic particles that are like billiard balls. They are vibrating packets of energy, and we are trading that energy with other energy out there. The thing that we call the field, which is a massive amount of energy that is the result of all these energy trades out there in empty space, so-called empty space. So we're sending out energy all the time. Our thoughts are going out every second. So think about it. All of those thoughts you've got, all of those judgments you hold, every last bit of flotsam and jetsam, every last mendacious thought you have, that also is an intention. And collectively, it becomes your life's intention. So thoughts that you have are intentions. And the problem is we are so unconscious about what we're thinking about most of the time, what we're sending out most of the time. That's what the universe hears too. So a lot of what I teach in my courses is about becoming much more conscious of what you're sending and really being directed about what you're sending.
So it's deliberate. So there's a real sense of being deliberate about that and being very aware. I know that there's a lot of talk these days about trauma, for example, and I find that a lot of people get very identified with it, right? So then they create more of it. If you're more aware of solutions and aware of ways in which you can move and recognize that you are doing it anyway all the time, so why not? Cleaning that up, to see that, okay, this is what was, and now I can see this from a different perspective. My vantage point changes, and therefore my deliberate intention for something else, something better, something more fluid, more coherent, then becomes then you keep seeing more of that in the world as well too. Would you say that's true, that there's that feedback loop?
Yes. I think also, to think about it, trauma is an energy. I mean, if we think about, one of the things that my husband, Brian Hubbard, talks about with his time-light theory is that time isn't a dimension, it's an energy. And that trauma sits on our shoulder like it happened yesterday. Even if it happened 40 years ago, it's there. It creates you, essentially.
Right.
And we identify with the trauma. Actually, the trauma creates the person that we think is the us. It's created by the trauma. And so one of the things that I work on, and I work on with Brian, is we take the power out of the trauma, essentially.
Right.
We give people
you unplug it.
Power. Yeah, we unplug it, and we give people back their power, because that's the problem with trauma. It is power lost. That is the problem with anything in the world that remains right on your shoulder. You have
Power lost.
you have lost your power. You have had an imbalance in a relationship with somebody or something. And so we reestablish the balance through a number of techniques. And one of those is intention and traveling back and forward in time. So, and I say back and forward in time because any quantum physicist worth his salt will tell you there is no such thing as linear time. The time is one big smeared out now. And so, so what we do is in the now, that is now, we take advantage of that. So if there is no linear time, we can use that to so-called fix the past.
So I want to now segue into talking about your book, The Power of Eight, because you are about to run a very important masterclass. And I can tell you as well, you know, again, your work, every time your work comes out in something, I'm always amazed because it's again, hardcore evidence that this works, that this is real. So I've, you know, experienced these things myself prior to reading the book. And then it's just like this extraordinary relief because you can show people that this works. So I want to talk about the miraculous energies that small groups can generate to both heal themselves and others. So let's talk about the power of eight and how powerful can small groups be and why we need it right now.
Oh, we do. We do more than anything. And I am harnessing those groups now. And I'll tell you about that shortly. Back in 2008, as you mentioned, I started doing, the year before, I started doing intention experiments because, you know, I'm a journalist at heart. I'm a hard-nosed journo at heart. And so when people are talking about manifesting this and that and power of intention and all of this stuff, the journo in me said, okay, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about, you know, flying up to the top of our roof with our thoughts? Are we talking about curing cancer with our thoughts? Are we talking about something very subtle, like shifting a quantum particle with our thoughts? You know, how far can we take this? I was also very interested in what happens when lots of people are thinking the same thought at the same time. And as you said, we started very small. We started with tiny little things like trying to shift the light emissions of a leaf. And we moved on to trying to make seeds grow faster, purify water. And then I got sick of all these seeds and water and leaves. And I said to the scientists I was working with, let's do something huge. Let's lower violence in a war-torn area. So we did. We sent intention to lower violence in Sri Lanka, which was going through a civil war at the time. And we had an extraordinary effect the 8 days we did it. The whole course of the war changed. I was really worried because violence went up during that week, not down. And I thought to myself, oh God, did we do that? And then suddenly it plummeted, but also the government, which had been losing against the rebels, who had the whole north of the country choked off, they were able to win a few decisive battles just in that week. And then they ended up taking over the north in a few months, and within a few more months, this 25-year intractable war was over. Now, it ended in a bloody finish, but it ended. Did we do this? Who knows? I've run a bunch of peace intention experiments after that, and even a healing experiment. We've run them over 40 to date, and 36 have shown measurable, positive, significant effects. So back in 2008, after we had run a few intention experiments, and they were working, and I was kind of shocked they were working so well, I thought, let's scale this down. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I could put people in something and try to do this in a workshop. So I wasn't sure what to do. So I'm kicking this around with my husband and some people in my office. And I said, oh, I don't know, maybe I'll put them in groups of 8 or so and have them send intention to someone in the group with a health challenge. And my husband, who's such a good headline writer, he's also a journalist, said, I love it, the power of 8. And that is how the name got started. So we did it, not expecting it to be anything more than a little feel-good effect, you know, like getting your back rubbed or something. We had the group send intention to a member of the group with a health challenge. And the next day, on the next day of the workshop, we had them come back and tell us what had happened in turn. And again, we thought it was going to be this mild little effect, and that is not what happened. What we heard were things like, I have depression, chronic depression, and it feels completely lifted. Somebody else, I have terrible IBS, my gut feels normal today. Somebody else, I limp all the time because of very bad arthritis in a knee, and I'm walking normally today. Somebody else, I have cataracts, and they're 80% better. And I was pretty shocked by this and a little upset because I thought, I'm not a healer, and this is going to take away from this serious scientific stuff I've got. So, but I kept playing with it. With every workshop, I kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And I kept getting these kinds of results. And so, let me give you an example. One talk, and it would be sometimes just a talk. For example, a few years ago, I did a big talk at the Mile High Church outside of Denver. And we had the audience go into groups of 8, just do a 10-minute intention. That's all it was. And that's all I ever do. And we had a woman who was scheduled for surgery. She had terrible, terrible knee arthritis. She couldn't even stand on her knee. It wobbled all the time. She did a deep squat right after it. We had somebody else who was a stroke victim and couldn't see after her stroke, couldn't focus her eyes focused normally. We had somebody else whose shoulder was dislocated and it was in terrible pain. It slotted back into place during the 10-minute intention, and her pain was gone. And somebody else who was really skeptical of the whole thing, but had a bad back, and her back stopped hurting afterward. So we had all kinds of things like this, and we continue to have all kinds of things like this. I've had 2 people get up out of their wheelchairs. One person paralyzed from the neck down, somebody else with MS, with multiple sclerosis. I've had all kinds of cancer reverse. I've had things like hip dysplasias, a baby born with hip dysplasia. It slotted back into place, shocked the doctor. We've had all kinds of things. We've had thousands of healings now in the time. But I did not know why this all was going on. So it took me 10 years to get the courage to publish my book, The Power of 8. I needed to know why this works. I'm probably the biggest doubting Thomas on the planet.
That's
when
good.
it comes to this. Well, I felt I need to know, why is this happening? We're just putting people in groups of 8 or so. They're doing a 10-minute intention all together, and people are getting healed, miraculously healed. And it couldn't have even been the placebo effect, because we've had it work on people who didn't believe one word of it. So I started looking into why, and I came up with numerous things. First of all, there is the power of intention. I mean, there's no doubt, and as you mentioned, I've written a whole book on the evidence about intention, the evidence, laboratory scientific evidence that intention can do everything from affect single-celled organisms to human beings and other things too. So there's the power of intention. There's no question that our thoughts are things that affect other things. But then there is the group effect. The French psychologist Émile Durkheim said that groups create an effervescent effect. There's a group effervescence. We all get hyped up with groups. But a big piece of this is altruism. One of the key things that happens with a Power of 8 group is you get off of yourself. And that is one of the things I consistently teach. When people are getting nowhere with their intentions, I will usually say to them, get off of yourself. Intend for somebody else who needs it more, and then see what happens. Don't do it just to get, but just see what happens. And one of the beauties of a Power of 8 group is you are giving most of the time. There's 8 of you. So 7/8 of the time, you're doing an intention for someone else. You then are receiving, but you're also receiving when you send. And I realized this when I started looking into the science of altruism. Altruism is completely like a bulletproof vest. People who do things for other people live longer, healthier, happier lives. There's no question about it. Volunteers live, I think they're 2/3 longer. Some amazing statistic like that. People who do anything for other people. If you're ill and you help somebody else with the same condition, you're more likely to get better. There was a wonderful study about this, about praying for people with depression. A psychologist who also happened to be a priest was fascinated by the idea of prayer healing people. There is plenty of evidence for that. There's about 150 good studies. So he wanted to see if prayer would also work for mental illness. So he got together 400 people with clinical depression, divided them into two groups. One group got the prayer, were given the prayer for them and prayed for it. The other group gave the prayer. So they gave the prayer to the others. So afterward, this psychologist priest used all kinds of psychological parameters to find out what had happened and who got improved. And he found that the prayed for group improved. They got better, but nowhere near as better as the people who had done the praying. And that sort of sums it up to me. There's no question about the power of giving. Probably the most powerful example of that of all, though, was another study that wanted to look at people who lived in a certain way and compare it to their immune systems. So one group were a group that we'd call people who are living the dream. They have all the money in the world, they've got loads of holidays, they've got loads of stuff. They're just got it all, as far as our culture says. So when the scientists looked at their immune systems, they figured they would see really powerful immune systems. They were shocked to discover the absolute reverse. These were people who were basically perfect candidates for a heart attack, stroke, Alzheimer's disease, all of those degenerative diseases. These people were going to drop like flies. Terrible immune systems. So then they looked at another group. They were people who didn't have as much money or as many holidays or as much stuff, but they were living a life of service. These people had totally robust immune systems. They were going to live forever. So that to me sums it up. And one of the things I really am worried about is the whole idea of self-help. That whole notion of self-help, being my best me, all of that, such a focus on it is dangerous for our health. I think what we need to do is be about other help. And the reason I think that is so important is that I've seen over and over in Power of Eight groups that when people do things for others, when they're the senders, they get healed as much as when they are the receiver.
And don't you find, too, that that's really the nature of compassion? When we're not so me-focused, we before me, then it enables us to be more empathetic and more compassionate for other people. I teach something called compassionate prosperity, where if you are going to be looking at this prosperous life, it has to be in service. If you do it for service and let go the form, you will be satisfied. There'll be a sense of whatever it comes to you is spectacular, and because your focus is different. I want to ask a couple of things, because in your book, I want to go back to the Power of Eight. There are some radical truths about thought. Thoughts are not neuronal firings. 2, thoughts are globally felt in your body. 3, thoughts are outrageous trespassers. This is like, I could talk about this for hours, but we don't have hours. But anyway, 4, thoughts are usually an unconscious broadcast. Because I really want people to hear and understand that thoughts are not what they think they are. And we have a choice, and we must become aware of those, including what you just said, which was about, to me, what you described was somebody who had accumulated, that their focus is on getting, and therefore but they were not, their immune systems were not well. They were not service driven, because you can be wealthy and be service driven. So as well.
Sure. What's important to you, what your life's purpose is all about. That's really what we're talking about, what we're driving at.
Yeah, which I love. So can you just kind of summarize a little bit or talk a tiny bit about those 4 concepts?
Yeah, I mean these are 4 actually. There's a few more too. Radical thoughts about thoughts, but yeah, we talked about thoughts are light already. Thoughts are all pervasive too. There are many scientists who now believe that thoughts and this light energy that we were talking about, these biophoton emissions, get transmitted through the body via a thing called microtubules. These are little hollow tubes that are the scaffolding of every cell. And they really hold cells together, and there's loads of them. Now, if you looked at an image, if I showed you the image of a cell, you would see that it is full of these little light pipes, as they're called. They're just absolutely full of, every cell is full of them. So imagine that thoughts are being broadcast. You're having thoughts, they're light, they're going through your body, they're actually going through every cell, because this light is also global. They've found in studies, Dr. Pop found in studies, if you put medicine on one part of your body, let's say your hand, it would change the light there, but it would also change the light all over your body. So imagine this light is going through, it's global, it's going through these light pipes. It's through every cell. There's so many of them in every cell. We're drenched in our thoughts. So thoughts are global. They are through our body. Our body feels it, which is, in my view, why most people get ill. It has nothing to do with genetics, or it is less to do with genetics. It has to do with toxic thoughts and toxic emotions.
But I so believe that.
And thoughts are trespassers. We are leaky buckets, and we, as I usually say, we're leaky buckets. We're leaking out thoughts all the time, and those thoughts are going into other people and things all the time. The evidence is clear on that. The studies are clear on that. My book, The Intention Experiment, goes into that, etc. And also, thoughts are a constant broadcast. As I mentioned, 70,000 thoughts a day. I bet you're not even conscious of what you're thinking about most of the time. But most of the time, I can tell you what you're thinking about. You're thinking, does my butt look big in this? You're thinking, I hate my hair. I hate my hair. You're also thinking, I hate her hair. Her butt looks big in this. I hate this person because he's Republican or he's Democrat or whatever. I hate. I dislike. I'm judging. And we're judging each other, ourselves, etc. 24/7. So that's what's going through your mind. Is most of the time it's a toxic thinking. Most of the time it's self-sabotaging, and most of the time it is affecting other people, whether you know it or not.
I know Dr. Larry Dossey had a really interesting book called "Be Careful What You Pray For." Do you remember? Do you remember that book? And he talked about
sure
that
do.
about. Right? I mean, it really is true. What we can impact each other in a very beautiful, positive way. So if we're looking at all the things that are going wrong in the world, and we just focus on that and have negative thoughts about that, we're going to see more of that. And because we're basically confirming it and adding to it. But if we do become more aware and conscious of our thoughts and join things like your masterclass, for example, and get into these Power of 8 groups, and we start to see the miracles, because that is the nature of the miracle in a way. I mean, I'm using language that's, in your case, it's actual evidence, but that's what people see as miracles. Like, it's possible. We absolutely can change the world one thought, one intention at a time.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
Absolutely.
so In your opinion, what's the greatest power that we all have inside that's just waiting to be unleashed so we can heal our lives?
Well, I think it is the power of our thoughts and the power of intention. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we do have these incredible untapped talents. We're born with
Yeah.
them. But our authority
Mm-hmm.
figures, like our parents or our teachers or whatever, deny this. We know this as children. We know we're miraculous beings as children. We know we have these powers, but we are discouraged from believing that they're real as we grow. And so we get diminished. We don't realize that we do have them. We go to accept the current scientific story, which is a story
Mm.
of separation. It's a story of
Yep.
separate things operating according to fixed laws in time and space. But we also end up believing that we are completely alone. We're not connected in any
Mhm.
way, and we're lonely people on a lonely planet in a lonely universe. That is our scientific story. So, this untapped potential, which I have seen work in small groups, which I've seen work in huge groups. I mean, we did a
Mhm.
story, and we did a story recently about some of my recent Power of Eight or intention experiments. And with one, we chose the officially most violent place in America, St. Louis, Missouri. And
Mm.
I had an audience. I was broadcasting this over Gaia TV, and I had an audience send intention to a neighborhood, a section of St. Louis, which was the most violent of the most violent city. So this was the most
Mm.
violent neighborhood in the country called Fairground. So we set an
Sure.
intention to lower violence around there. And we did it over 6 days, just 10 minutes a day. And afterward, I worked with Dr. Jessica Utz, who is a professor of statistics at the University of California. We
Mhm.
got a hold from the St. Louis Police Department of violent crime and property crime statistics, monthly crime,
Yep.
from 3 years before to 6 months afterward. And we found, and we looked at St. Louis as a whole and also Fairground
Sure.
specifically. And we found out uh, all of the crime statistics had been going up on a total upward trajectory for the 3 years before our intention. Afterward, with the 6 months, they continued to go up as St. Louis as a whole. Property crime continued to go up,
Mhm.
St. Louis as a whole. Property crime in Fairground continued to go up in Fairground, but violent crime, the focus of our intention, went down by 43%.
Right.
So
Wow.
we've seen this, and we've seen amazing changes between people in the participation of intention experiments. That's my big focus right now. We
Mhm.
saw this in the 10th anniversary of 9/11. I was
Right.
pretty tired of watching those buildings come down. You know, the videos we see every
Sure.
year on the
Mhm.
anniversary of 9/11. So I thought we needed another narrative here. So I did an intention experiment for Westerners, but I also asked a guy called Dr. Salah al-Rashid, who is like the Deepak Chopra of the Middle East with a huge
Right.
following.
I know who he is.
He
Yeah.
has sponsored me as a speaker many times in the Middle East. So I asked him to bring his following to our intention experiment too. And we had our experiment translated into Arabic as well on my website. So both sides did an intention to lower violence in Afghanistan at the time. This was 2011. And I was astonished afterward to notice that the Americans and the Arabs were Facebooking each other afterward and saying, "Your God is my God. You are my brother from the other side. I am saying, I've always wanted to apologize for this," et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They were
Wow.
forgiving each other. They were connecting. They were they were they were overcoming it. It was amazing. And we found this too I did an experiment with Arabs and Israelis a few years ago. We were able to use equipment that could put a camera into 9 auditoriums. And so we put cameras in 8 auditoriums of Arabs in different countries, so in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and Jordan, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And the 9th camera was in an auditorium filled with Israeli Jews. So I had to mediate this whole process because neither side was talking to the other side. They were refusing to even talk to each other. So we did. And we did this intention for Jerusalem because there was a part of Jerusalem going through a lot of violence at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And afterward, the equipment was very cool because I could speak to all of them and call on them, and they could speak to me and each other in turn.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really great interactive equipment. So afterward, I asked them, how was it for you? And again, we had this love fest again. The Arabs are telling the Jews, we love you, your God is my God. And the Jews are saying, it's time of compassion, it's a time of peace, we need to come together. And, and afterward, they were telling me how amazing it was. Some of the Arabs had said to me, we've never actually even seen a Jew before. We're taught that they have horns growing out of their heads. And the same, when I know, and reverse, etc. There's just such polarization.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed it was coming together. So that's been the real interesting part for me is it's the process of doing it. This is why the Power of 8 groups work so well. There's the senders where there's an effect. With the big intention experiments, I've been surveying people since 2008, since that first Sri Lanka peace intention experiment. And I was astonished to find not only do people talk about the whole event itself, the participation, feeling like a mystical, altered state, but they also have healings. They have big changes in their lives. They report their lives becoming more peaceful, getting along better with their estranged partner or their not so nice boss. They talk about 50% usually say, I'm more in love with everybody I come in contact with. 50%. And, these are thousands of people writing in. And about a third say that they have some sort of physical healing, an improvement in a condition or a full-fledged healing. So, people going around afterward hugging strangers. There's like this really strange mirror effect going on. So
I love it.
That. Yeah, but I've also found, as I say, in the small groups, the senders are getting healed as much as the receivers.
So tell me a little bit about the Masterclass, because I believe you do that once a year. You do it every single year, and it's coming up, and I think everybody's going to want to run and join it. So can you give us a little information about that?
Absolutely. So back in about 2015, I thought to myself, what would happen if I put people into groups for an entire year and worked with them? After seeing all of this amazing stuff going on. And so I do. What I do with the Power of 8 Intention Masterclass is show people 13 keys to intention mastery. So to really do intention well, there are certain techniques. And I've put together and distilled a process that is a mix of frontier science and ancient wisdom to come up with, and I know various teachers, and I've looked at all kinds of teachers from master healers to Buddhist monks. They have certain differences in their techniques, but also some commonalities. And there's also a lot of science showing what works best. So I put together what I consider 13 keys. I teach them. I teach people how to use intention for different things. So intention doesn't just have to be used for healing your body. Intention can be used to heal your life. So I have been working with people to help them use intention to heal finances, for instance, or to create the career they always wanted, or to heal relationships, or to find a new relationship, or to change their life purpose. A lot of people come on the course who say, okay, now what? My kids are grown, and now what? What's my real life purpose? And so I show people how to do that too. And I also show you how to use intention for relationships,
That's
to
great.
improve current relationships, or to get along with people you don't get along with.
Ooh.
You can use intention to overcome any kind of polarization. So I teach a lot of
Oh,
that.
everybody needs that. Everybody
Everybody
needs
needs
that
it now.
now. Well, I'm very excited. So, for those of you who are listening today, we are going to have a lot of information all about how to sign up for this and more about Lynne McTaggart. I want to do something that I do with all my guests, and I'd love us to pull an oracle card. I'm going to pull a card, and what the intention is that the Wooniverse will reflect back to us something that we might need to conclude our talk with, or affirm us with. Are we game?
We are game. Why not?
Okay, here it comes. Oh, this is so great. So the card is from my deck, the Oracle of the Seven Energies, and it relates to intuition. And the card is Wish Upon a Star. And it is about the innocence of intention. that it is a wish that is open-ended, that it is all about being yes, asking for oneself without even knowing it. It is the acknowledgement that the wish, the thought, the intention would touch the star and come and reflect back to us. Any thoughts on that? Or
Yeah.
fun?
Um, Intention is more purposeful than just wishing. But
Right.
what I take from that idea, when you wish upon a star, I think it's all about belief. I think it's
Yeah.
all about trust and belief. And I always say, trust the process. I love
Yeah.
the Buddhist idea of you put your empty cup out and it gets filled. And I always
Yeah.
tell my students, you've got to believe. You've got to believe no matter what. You have to trust the process. You also have to let go. In
Yeah.
many, many instances, I have people who don't believe and have
Right.
given up hope. And I tell
Mhm.
them, first of all, you must believe, and secondly, get off of yourself for a while. So I'll give you
Yeah.
an example. Andy Spiros. Andy was going through a divorce, and she had sold her gift store business, so she needed new work. She had two young children. So she didn't know what to do because none of her intentions were manifesting. So I finally said to her, Andy, get off of yourself. Intend for this young kid. There was a kid called Luke whose stepfather wrote me that he had broken up with his first serious girlfriend. So he threw himself off a 40-foot structure onto
Oh.
hard ground. And Luke broke every bone in his body, got nerve damage, brain damage. Nobody thought he was going to live. The doctors thought he was hopeless case. So I had Andy and the other members of my master class intend for Luke, while his stepfather kept a running commentary of what was going on. Luke seemed to miraculously respond to our intentions. And he got out of the hospital in record time. He's now a totally healthy 19-year-old. The more interesting thing, however, well, that is quite miraculous. What happened
Is
to
Andy.
Andy? Andy gets a call out of nowhere the following week from somebody she doesn't even know offering her her dream job. She also goes on to change her rancorous divorce into a model divorce that lawyers on both sides said, could you tell us what you were doing so we can have a blueprint and use it for our future clients? So Andy's whole life turned around by the process of getting off of herself and also
Mhm.
trusting. Just saying, okay, I'll leave, I'll park my stuff, I'll do this for someone else, and the universe provides. So I think that whole idea of trusting is really at the heart of
Mm.
that idea.
Ah, I love that. Okay, we're going to switch gears and travel into another dimension of the Wooniverse called the Tea Time After Party. We're going to invite our executive producer, Connie Deletti, in here, and we're going to kick up the fun a little bit. And are you ready for some fun questions?
I am ready.
Okay, I have the first one. You are banned from the library. Why?
Oh, I'm a total disruptor. I'm a naughty girl. I'm a total disruptor. I am I'm a bomb thrower at heart. I'm an investigative reporter at heart, and I like to stir things up. I've been stirring up things about modern medicine for 32 years.
Love
So,
it.
yeah, that's me at my heart. I want to change things. I want to make things better. I'm constantly thinking about that. Right now, I'm thinking about a lot about
Right.
about my Power of Eight groups being an army of
Mm.
change makers.
Ooh,
That's
yum.
amazing.
I might join one of these things.
Yeah.
Your
Little-
turn, Connie.
Okay, Lynn, I have a question. If you could live inside of any sitcom or show of your choice, what would it be?
Okay, I'm going to have to time travel, I suppose. I think I probably would like to have been in Frasier, which was
Frasier.
Oh my gosh,
brilliantly
me
written.
too. Oh,
Brilliantly written.
yes.
I wouldn't have minded being a friend in New York with friends, you know. And
Yes.
I probably
Yes.
would have loved to be in Sex and the City too. I lived in New York for the first 8
Wow.
years of my life after university, so I wouldn't have minded knowing that gang of girls.
Yeah, I love that.
I'd want to be in Bewitched.
Another good one,
Yeah,
Colette.
just wiggling your little nose, that'd be good.
Right. What was the most outrageous fashion trend you've rocked?
Oh, golly. Well, I liked Norma Kamali a lot in my 20s. I guess I wore a kind of a tutu when I was in my late 20s. And
Cool.
I went through a period in the 80s of lots of kind of curly hair. My hair was very dark in my youth. It was nearly black. So I guess
Love it.
I was rocking an 80s look, I suppose.
Okay.
Back then.
That's cool.
I love that. Could you maybe share the best or the worst job you had, like as a
You've
teen
ever
or
had.
something?
Let's see. When I was in college, I was a receptionist at a mobile home company. You know, they had those
Okay,
the trailers
yeah.
type things,
Mhm.
and I kept getting calls from people where the trailer had melted. Basically, it was so poorly made. So that was
Oh,
that
wow.
was right up there. I did a lot of
Jeez.
waitressing in my teens, and
Mm.
I was a clumsy waitress. So I remember. Dropping food over a lot of people and them feeling sorry for me and giving me good tips, and also getting hit on a lot when I worked in a
Right.
bar. So I remember
Wow.
one time getting pissed off and taking a whole jug of beer and pouring it over some guy's head. So that was good.
Okay.
And I guess the topper though is in New York as a struggling writer. In my few years after university, I took a job as a ghostwriter, and this is brilliant. It was a ghostwriter for a woman who was very well known for sewing and seamstressing, et cetera, et cetera. And I used to have to go to her office, and she would tell me, oh, give it some color, and she would talk about all of this stuff. So I remember having to write things about sewing duvets and so that you can shake and make your bed and stuff like that. Terrible little puns. So
Oh,
I guess
wow.
those all sort of were some of my worst ones.
Those are what a highlight reel. Yeah.
Okay. Last question. If you could be any supernatural creature, what would you be and why?
Oh, golly. I have to think about being the Incredibles. Do I want a force field or do I want to see into, do I want to, probably X-ray vision would be helpful, but maybe embarrassing. That would be good. I wouldn't mind flying. I'd like to fly, I think. I think I'd like to fly.
Yeah. That's a great choice.
I love that.
That's a great choice.
To learn more about Lynne and all her offerings, you can visit her at lynnmctaggart.com. And as always, you can find a transcript of this episode quotes, all the links, and so much more on our show notes page. So go to itwpodcast.com or click the link in this episode's description. Lynne, it has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. It's been a real pleasure too, and lots of fun questions to answer.
So what did we learn today? Oh my gosh. I think the most important thing that I learned today is how important it is to monitor my thoughts and how important it is to remain either neutral or very positive about other people, and to be very, very conscious of my judgments, because we can impact the world. We really can. And we can heal the world. I mean, this is such an exciting conversation. I've been following Lynne for years, and I know that I love the fact that she really brings hardcore evidence to the table. So, wow, it's so great. And I'm definitely going to be myself personally signing up to one of her classes. So thank you for listening. Until next time, I'm Colette Baron-Reid. Be well.